So, this episode almost didn't happen, not because I forgot to record it, because about 2 hours into this new Endfield episode, I was genuinely asking myself if this was going to be the last video I ever make on this game, which is a weird thing to admit considering how this channel's relationship with Endfield started. The last main story episode? I loved it, genuinely. It showed me this game could improve its storytelling, and it improved in exactly the direction I wanted it to go. And then, nothing. 2 months of nothing. A couple of map expansions, a couple of character stories, one of which belonged to someone who isn't even in the main plot. So today we finally get the next chapter. And I want to be honest with you about something before we get into it. For the first couple of hours, I was not having a good time. I'll get into exactly why in a second, but I want you to sit with that, because by the end of this episode, my opinion looks very different than it did 2 hours in. I don't think that turn happens by accident, so let's start where I actually started, annoyed, running low on patience, and honestly, halfway out the door. Here's the thing about live service games nobody really talks about. It's rarely one bad update that makes you quit, it's the quiet ones. After that last main story episode, I was actually excited for Endfield in a way this game hadn't fully earned from me before. And then 2 months of near silence just let that excitement run out of oxygen, slowly, without ever feeling like a single dramatic moment. You don't sit there one day and decide you're done with the game, you just open it a little less, check the patch notes a little less closely, and by the time something actually happens, you're not showing up the same way you would have 2 months earlier. So by the time this new episode dropped, I wasn't showing up with that same excitement. I was showing up curious, a little skeptical. Prove to me this was worth the wait. And here's the thing that actually makes this episode significant beyond just a new story episode. This is basically the culmination of Wuling's arc. Not the ending, but close to it. 10 years these people have been trying to reclaim a home a disaster took from them. That's a massive emotional premise. 10 years of grief finally reaching some kind of resolution. That's the kind of setup that should hit hard the moment the episode starts. So why didn't it feel like one? For roughly the first half of this episode, the story kept getting interrupted by the game. New map, new traversal mechanic, a tutorial, another stretch of exploration before the next story beat actually lands. I'd say 60, maybe 70% of this entire episode is just exploration. And I mean that literally. Long stretches of just moving through space, learning a new system, before the game lets you back into the thing you actually came for. And look, I wouldn't normally hold this against Endfield specifically. Plenty of gacha games use new story content as an excuse to unlock a map. It's practically the genre standard at this point. Nobody's shocked by it anymore. Except lately, my bar for this genre has moved. Wuthering Waves, Zenless Zone Zero, Girls Frontline 2, these games have gotten so good at using environment as a delivery engine for story that when Endfield does the opposite, when the environment interrupts the story instead of carrying it, I notice. I cannot notice anymore. That's not really Endfield's fault exactly, it's just where the rest of the genre has dragged my expectations. So for the first half, 20 or 30 minutes could pass between meaningful story bits, and when your story is supposed to be about 10 years of grief finally resolving, that's exactly the kind of gap you can't afford. The emotion needs momentum, and momentum is the first thing that dies when you keep getting pulled out of the story to go learn a new mechanic. Now, I want to be precise here, because this isn't a takedown. The second half tightens up considerably, the story bits get stronger, closer together, and the imbalance stops feeling as glaring. It's not like the entire episode drowns in this. But it's still there, underneath the whole episode, story as passenger, map as driver, more often than I'd like. That's the frustration I walked in with. And normally, that's the kind of thing that would have been enough to make me quit, not because it's some unforgivable sin, but because it's exactly the kind of slow, quiet frustration that made me drift away over the last 2 months in the first place. It wasn't enough this time though, because somewhere in the middle of all that exploration, this episode does something I genuinely didn't expect. Once you get past that slow first half, something shifts. And it's not really about the plot advancing, it's about how the plot advances. Gacha games love keeping character stories and main story in separate boxes. You get your main plot over here, and then somewhere else entirely a character's personal arc that barely touches it. Enfield's done that before too. Not this time, or not entirely. This episode weaves Arcane's backstory directly into the main plot, and it's some of the best writing Enfield has done. Arcane's story is about responsibility, about inheriting a will that was never really hers to carry, and about the question that actually makes this interesting. Once that burden is finally resolved, once the reason you've been living for is over, is there anything left? Is that the end of your road, or is there another path? That's not a small question to ask a character, it's the kind of question that only lands if the writing actually earns it. And honestly, I think this did. They deliver it through the phantoms of the past, through the blight, forcing Arcane to literally confront the weight she's been carrying. Not metaphorically, literally standing across from it. Her scenes with Chen are some of the most human moments this game has written. Quiet, a little funny, the kind of conversation that doesn't resolve anything immediately but still feels like it matters. And by the end, when the protagonist helps her make peace with everything, she doesn't just stop, she chooses to keep carrying the will she inherited anyway, not because she has to anymore, because she decides it still means something, even without the original reason attached to it. I think that's genuinely one of the better character beats I've seen in this genre recently. Not because the concept is new, inherited burden, what happens after is resolved, that's a well I've seen plenty of writers draw from, but because the execution actually sits with the discomfort instead of rushing past it to get to the comforting answer. I want to be honest about one thing that still needs work here though. Even with the character story woven into the main plot, you can feel the seams. When the story dips into Arcane's material, the main plot doesn't really move alongside it. It pauses, waits its turn. It's not bad writing, it's just not fully integrated yet. That's a needs more reps problem, not a needs a rewrite problem. I'd rather see a studio attempting this and not quite landing it than not attempting it at all. But here's the thing, I came out of Arcane's arc actually caring again, which is exactly when the episode decided to really escalate. So, remember Neferith, the antagonist we were pretty clearly supposed to have killed at the end of the last episode. She's back, and honestly, I wasn't that surprised. Enfield's world leans hard into high fantasy, and in a high fantasy world, that was never going to be that simple. I know some of you are already rolling your eyes at the fake out. I get it, that's a fair reaction to have, but I actually love this. Here's what her return actually does though. It's not just she's alive, it's that we learn she betrayed Ardashir. The antagonist this entire conflict has revolved around since the beginning. That single relationship breaking apart changes the entire shape of the conflict. It's not the same fight anymore. The thing anchoring this story since day one just cracked in half. Okay, let that sit for a second, because there's more. Ardashir himself isn't gone either. The story tells us directly, he's overcome his physical body, not dead, transformed. Which means we're seeing him again, and honestly, I respect that they're not using "is he actually dead" as their tension engine going forward. That's usually the laziest trick in this genre's playbook, and they just quietly opted out of it. But that's still only one layer of what changed here, because this episode also officially introduces the Foundation, which, from everything shown, is the actual driving force the protagonist has apparently been fighting against since the very beginning. Not a new threat, the threat, the one that was always underneath everything else. And here's the detail that makes it personal instead of just lore. The protagonist used to be part of the Foundation, which immediately raises the only question that matters. What happened? Why did they turn against the people they used to belong to? We don't get that answer yet. Obviously, that's just how this game handles its mysteries. But we do get Aleikreos, the boss of this episode and the creation of the protagonist, built back when they were still inside the Foundation. Fighting something you made, from a life you apparently walked away from, is exactly the kind of confrontation that makes a mystery feel earned instead of teased. And suddenly, we're not talking about the original conflict anymore. We're talking about something on a universe scale. For players who've been here since the original game, some of this probably isn't new. For me, it's brand new information. And I'm not going to pretend that doesn't excite me. This is exactly the kind of moment where a story stops feeling like a series of regional problems and starts feeling like it's actually been building towards something the whole time. One more thread before I let this episode go. She showed up early in this episode and barely got any focus, to the point where I was ready to criticize how wasted she felt. Then the ending brought her back for one more scene, and it recontextualizes her completely. She's one of the only people alive who actually knows the protagonist's past. She's apparently been an ally since the very beginning. I want her to just tell us everything. She obviously won't, that's the game. But that's exactly the kind of thread that makes me want to be back here for the next episode, instead of drifting away like I almost did with this one. I walked into this episode 2 hours from quitting. I'm walking out of it already thinking about what Alecreos actually is, what she knows, what it actually caused the protagonist to leave the Foundation. That's a lot of open questions for one episode to leave me with, and somehow none of them feel like the game is stalling. They feel like the game is finally ready to talk. If they fix the pacing, if the next episode trusts the story enough to stop using the map as a delay tactic, I genuinely think Endfield is closing the gap on Wuthering Waves' storytelling faster than I expected. Faster than I think a lot of people expected, honestly. So here's what I actually want to know from you. Did the first half lose you the same way it almost lost me? Or is this just me being a little too impatient with my exploration? Anyway, that's gonna be all from me for this one. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more story discussions like this one. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.